This is the first day of the week. God has given us this time and opportunity to worship Him in spirit and in truth. And we've taken that time and opportunity today to present our best to Him, to offer Him the gifts and sacrifices of God's people today. I have a continuation of the lesson. The first lesson we talked about answering the social drinkers' arguments. We're going to continue by talking about a lesson I've planned to bring for some time. I've actually borrowed somewhat of this title from a book that I bought, What Every Christian Needs to Know About Alcohol, and he talked about some other things as well. But I actually wanted to retitle that and really include everyone, because that's really what needs to happen, is that everybody needs to be re-educated and educated on what alcohol and the problems of it in our society. Not just Christians, but the world needs to know this message, that it's not all it's cracked up to be, that the things of this world that Satan offers us by the promise of a good time, the pleasures of sin for a season, is not what any of us really need to do, especially alone Christians. But the world itself needs to be taught and to do better and to know better. Our lesson text is taken from Proverbs chapter 23. I'd actually put Proverbs 20 verse 1 down before I changed my mind about this particular lesson text. But here in Proverbs 23, the wise man goes on to tell us, beginning with verse 29, says, "Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaining? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? Those who linger long over wine, those who go to taste mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. At the last it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things, and your mind will utter perverse things. And you will be like the one who lies down in the middle of the sea, or like the one who lies down on top of a mast. They struck me, but I did not become ill. They beat me, but I did not know it. When shall I awake? I will seek another drink." And that reminds us of really what we're talking about this morning. The problem is basically what Solomon is telling us in a nutshell, is the problem of inebriation and the giving in to intoxicating things that influence us in ways that the Christian should not be going down the road of that particular type of lifestyle and things, them choices, if you will. I want to start by talking about drinking alcohol bears no good fruit when it comes to the things that we see in our society and even in our lives as well as Christians. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 17 and 18, Jesus was talking about the false teacher when he said, "Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and nor can a bad tree bear good fruit." Now, what's the point of Jesus talking about here? How does this principle apply to what we're talking about when it comes to choices and decisions, what we want to do, what we don't do in our walk with God and our life in general, if you will? Well, he's talking about you look at the results, the fruits of something. And you oftentimes put the pros and cons of a particular thing. Say, well, what's it good for? What's it bad for? Well, that's what we're going to do this morning with the subject of alcohol. That's talking about the intoxicating way of the fermented juice that people call wine and such, and liquor and such. Well, what good fruit does it bear? Can we name really anything that it bears? Well, that's the question of our hour. Does it bear good fruit or evil fruit? Let's look at some of the things that really happens in our society today. Many problems that happens because people have chosen to do the wrong thing. Well, behind cancer and heart attacks, drinking alcohol is the third most serious health problem in the United States. And I would say it's actually at epidemic levels where people are drinking at more of a rate. And people do this for different reasons. They do it to celebrate. Somehow we've bought, actually people who do this have bought into the lie that you have to have alcohol to celebrate something. You have some kind of promotion, you get some alcohol to celebrate this. Well, that's the way that Satan works. He wants us to think a good time is the only way to have a good time is if we do sinful things. That's why we see the serious health problems. We talk about some of the things like cirrhosis of the liver. That just doesn't happen also to only the people who are the gutter drunks. You know, sometimes people say, well, that's the extreme. The alcoholic is doing that. Well, even people who drink in moderation have the same problem when it comes to health issues. It's bad for our heart and other things as well when it comes to over drinking, when it comes to that. But it also accounts for 27% of all admissions to state and county mental hospitals have something to do with alcohol consumption, if you will. And then alcohol-related accidents kill one person every 24 minutes. And that number itself ought to be a reason to realize, I need to rethink this, that if it does that much damage to our society, killing one person every 24 minutes, and that also that 50% of all highway accidents are alcohol-related. And kind of a side note to this, when you're driving on the highway, there's been some numbers done about this, that when you're on the road, at least after midnight, you better be very careful, because at that time you're more likely to run into someone who is inebriated, who's driving home after some party and such. You have to kind of throw this in. We were living at Farmington. That's exactly what happened to a young man who was driving home from such a party. He didn't make it home. He actually hit our porch as he was driving, came home, and actually the sad part is the police had to wake us up because we'd all gone to bed. After midnight, he hit our porch, and next thing we knew, there was a knock at the door. And they said, well, you've got somebody who knocked your post down. And that's exactly what happened. He had gone through the neighbor's yard and through our yard just to hit the porch there on our front porch. So 50% of all highway accidents are alcohol-related, and 80% of all violent crimes are also alcohol-related as well. And that's some of the numbers that you can look up and verify this yourself when it comes to this. But when it comes to you and I, though, what do the Scriptures say? You know, that's just some of the bad things that happens, the bad fruits. And as one preacher once said, and I have to throw this in as well, if you had bad friends that were doing all these bad things, what would somebody say to you about this? Well, they'd say you need some new friends, because this is not a friend. Sometimes people think that it's a best friend, but it's not absolutely their best friend at all. It's their enemy, if you will, to their spiritual life, especially there. Because alcohol is deceptive, Proverbs 20 verse 1. Wine is a mocker. Strong drink is a brawler. And whoever is led astray by it is not wise. So we're not walking in wisdom. We go down the beer drinking and the whiskey and all that, the strong drink that of our age today. We're actually following a path that leads us away from God. You're not more spiritual because you're drinking the spirits. You're more spiritual because you're drinking of the Holy Spirit rather than the spirits of this world that are offered out to us today. And alcohol is addictive. As we looked in the passage about in Proverbs 23 verse 35, here the young man is going through all these problems, and people like have been beating him. He didn't feel it, and he's lying down in the sea, and all these things. He's seeing strange things before his eyes. He's uttering perverse things. But yet after it's all over, what did he say? Well, when I shall awake, I may seek another drink. In other words, I want this again. And really, that's the problem. Your body actually craves the ethyl alcohol that is produced by the fermentation process. Your body will become addicted to it to such a level that you have to go through a detoxification. And you have to dry out, as they say. And there's a problem with that because people have serious problems. That's why there's AA meetings, because of such addiction levels of alcohol. And sometimes people are in such denial that I can quit when I want to. I just choose not to quit. That's because they're addicted already to this alcohol. And they need help, professional help, when it comes to getting away from such harmful things to their lives. But also destroys our good influence. As a Christian, We cannot afford to even go down that path. Even if people think, well, if drinking in moderation is all right, well, what if people don't know that? What if they think because we're taking alcohol in the first steps of that we are doing the wrong thing? And we would be. So, best advice to this is don't do this at all. Don't let people see this in our lives, because when they were to see you do this, they would automatically think, well, this person's going down the road to this. And we should be careful to guard our influence. If we're tempted to do this in a sinful way and we give in to that, and that's really what I'm talking about. Even as children of God, we can be those who have not the good influence that we need to have. Matthew 15:13 says, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? In other words, we give in to this and say, I'll just do it on the side. Nobody will see me. But yet, there's very little times that you could ever do sin and people don't know about it. At least the person who checks you out and you buy these particular things. And the people will see you like people oftentimes do. Like Moses said, be sure your sin will find you out. And our influence is destroyed over a moment of weakness when it comes to this, because going down this road is not where we want to be as a child of God and a Christian. Verse 16 talks about letting people see your good works. Let God be glorified by good works. Well, if we already seen, and we're going to see throughout all this lesson, drinking of alcohol has nothing good when it comes to good works or anything about that. It's actually more about pleasing self than pleasing God. And that's where the problem. Our influence is destroyed. We become ourselves addicted to these kind of things, and it's a problem in our lives. But not only that, drinking alcohol clouds our thinking and our judgment. And that's one of the dangerous things about this is that even after the first couple of drinks, the person who's under the influence of it, their thinking is not as clear, not as rational as it ought to be. Proverbs 31 verses 4 and 5, the Bible tells us about this. It says, it is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes in intoxicating drink, lest they drink and forget the law and pervert the justice of all the afflicted. So we can forget. That's what someone once said about drinking into oblivion. That word oblivion means to forget, a state of forgetfulness. And that's exactly what can happen. We forget about our morals and our stance as a child of God. We can forget about where we're wanting to go as a Christian. That's going to heaven. And drinking alcohol, getting intoxicated, goes against the very goal that we have in trying to go to heaven. We'll talk more about that in our last point. But in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 5 through 9, take your Bible and turn it over if you will. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, we see again about this idea of soberness. And that's really what I want to emphasize, especially verses 6 and 8. But let's look at verses 5 through 9 first of all. It says, for you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of night nor of darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober. For those who sleep do their sleeping at night, and those who get drunk at night. But since we are of the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and of love, and as a helmet, the hope of salvation. For God has not destined us to wrath, but for obtaining salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, that whether we awake or asleep, we will live together with Him. I read on to verse 10, but let's look at this idea. He's making a stark contrast. He's talking about people of light as people are people of light, and the darkness. I think he's actually talking about the night and darkness where activities are done. We do our life during the day. Isn't it true that most of the time these people that go to these clubs and the nightclubs of this bars of this life, they don't open until a certain time in the evening times. And they'll stay up to past midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. And you see people that nightlife, that lifestyle, that people are so accustomed to, that drink and do those kind of things. They're about that, aren't they? And Paul makes that contrast to that. Notice the word, he uses the word sober. And this is really what it means. I think he's making a play on this because he's talking about being sober and being alert. But he also talks about this word sober actually means this as well, that we're free from the influence of intoxicants. And that's really the idea, because when we are under the influence of alcohol and drugs, and you put that also in that same boat, there's a problem in our lives. We simply do not have the rational capabilities to make big decisions. If you ever go to the doctor and they'll give you some kind of thing that they'll tell you, don't make any big decisions right after you get off I think Brandy just went and she had a scope done, and they told her the same thing when she got out. When she was her mind wasn't as clear because of the drugs and such, or the anesthesia, if you will. Well, they say don't make any big decisions and don't try to go to work. And that's really true, isn't it? Because all of us know we're under the influence. We're not thinking like we should. And there's a lot of things can happen when we're not thinking. There's also a great contrast in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 to 8. I didn't put the chapter down, but chapter 5, if you will, where Paul says, see then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Therefore do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. He says here in verse 18, and do not be drunk with wine, in which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. Now again, some people say, well, there you go. You can be drunk as long as you don't go too far, because that's dissipation. No, he says being drunk, period, is dissipation. That's the problem, isn't it? When you get to that point of the what some people say, the buzz, the time where you're under the influence of alcohol, when you could be arrested for that, especially because you're under the influence, you're driving and such. That's the problem. This is all dissipation. It's overflow of wickedness, if you will. That's what we have to empty out of our lives. And drinking alcohol lowers our inhibitions and self-control. Proverbs 23, 33 to 35, again, going back to that passage, notice what he says about that man who has this problem. He says, your eyes will see strange things, your heart will utter perverse things. I want to stop there because we've read that already. What happens when people get drunk? They say things they don't mean sometimes. They'll do things they would not do, because it lowers the ability to really think and govern our actions like we should. Because once you have that problem, alcohol is the problem here when it comes to that. As somebody put it, it's like getting in a car with no brakes. You have no way to stop it. So you get in a car, you're stuck in that position. So my advice, and I think God's advice really is the same. Don't go down this road, because once you start, you can go down this road and it will lead you to places, you do things you'll never thought you'd ever do because of your lack of self-control. Proverbs 25 verse 28 tells us, whoever has no ruler over his own spirit is like a city broken down with walls. And we all know what happens when you have a city with no walls. The enemy just comes right in and takes whatever it wants to take, does whatever it wants to do. And who is our enemy? We know our enemy is the devil. The devil knows this will happen if people drink alcohol. It will cause them to do things they shouldn't do. And again, forget doing God's will. And drinking alcohol impairs our ability to function in life. As I mentioned in the first lesson, there are some effects on our body, the material part of ourselves, you might say the physical part. And this really happens at the first couple of drinks. And it gets progressively worse as the more a person drinks. Proverbs 21 verse 17 tells us this. He who loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich. And that really tells us, if you love this, if this is what your pursuit in life is, and I believe I've seen people in the world, I've actually been friends with some, I had co-workers that were like this. They worked all week so they could get drunk all weekend. Well, that does happen, doesn't it? People still make those choices to do that. And that's the way they live their lives. And they say, well, I'll go to work Monday, but I'll have a hangover. Well, it becomes a way, really a harder way to function in life. And the more they do that, as the older they get, to progressively less functioning they actually are in life. And you think about some of the things it causes. Being addicted to alcohol especially has some serious consequences. And before I say this, there has been no person that's really set out to become an alcoholic addicted completely to this. They may say, well, I'm just going to drink in moderation. And then moderation led to the full-blown problems that they have in their lives. And that's how you start. That's how Satan works. He's progressive in the way he gets us to fall for sin, if you will. Because sin waxes worse and worse. Well, there's times when it becomes difficult or impossible to work a full day without drinking. And I had some men that like that would sneak on the job, would try to drink some on the job. Actually, one of them was so clever, he actually hid some beer or something out back in our garage. We had a garage we came to hold all of our material and such as we did construction work. He went out back and would drink while he was there. He'd do it like midday whenever we came home for lunch or such. Well, that's the problem. Sometimes people cannot even go a full day, an 8-hour day, if you will, without drinking. And people who drink to forget their problems add to their problems tenfold. People start out like this. So I want to forget my problems. And before you know it, you've got the biggest problem, because what you did to forget your problems is now your biggest problem. And because drinking often brings strife, it builds walls in our relationships as well. That's one of the saddest parts about this is. And I know people who have suffered much for this. And my heart goes out to them, because I know families have been torn apart because of this. And people have been influenced in the sense of their lives have been affected. And I tell you, that's Satan at work. And Satan works in insidious ways to try to tear up and destroy everything in any way possible. And the drinking of alcohol is absolutely one of his best tools to destroy homes and relationships and friendships and all that, because that's how he works in our lives today. And the pleasures of alcohol dominate